Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this is Mossy. I decided to force him to be in the last video. Mossy is one of my dogs. He's my buddy. He's the youngest of the pack. And Mossy, do you want to get down? You want to be in the video? You want to get down? All right, get down. It is week 11 here in History 112 here at EOU, and this week we have a reading assignment that's not from our textbook. I have posted the reading for this week in Canvas. The topic of our reading this week is the global war on terrorism. It deals with the world and the United States in the aftermath of September 11th. And it's not covered in your textbook, but I wanted to assign it for our last week's reading because it is our last week's activity because it is so significant to the world today. It is very significant to the United States' involvement in parts of the world today. It's very significant to American interventions, the support of American-backed interventions in places like Yemen today. So it's a very, very significant event that goes well beyond the justification for the intervention in Afghanistan or Iraq. It justifies a myriad of activities that the United States takes in the world today, and as a result, is playing a very fundamental role in shaping world history currently. So we'll be reading, the reading is on Canvas, and we'll be reading about the post-September 11th era and the global war on terrorism. Remember, if you have not done a paper this term, you still have an option to do the second paper. I dropped the lowest paper grade in this class. And so if you didn't do well in the first paper, you can do the second paper and it'll be no consequence. I'll only take the highest grade. If you haven't done any paper, if you didn't do the first paper, you really need to do this second paper, because if you don't do the second paper, it means you're going to go in as a 0 for 20% of your grade. And so it's a short paper. Just follow the directions. It's a short paper. I want to see 3 different academic sources. I want to see you make a historical argument. I have a prompt posted to give you an idea for the direction you might take some of these papers. But just remember, make sure you do that paper. All the information for it is up in Canvas this week. So please, if you haven't written one of the papers this term, make sure you write this last second paper option. We also have our last test. It's due Sunday at the end of the week. So, like I said, this week's discussion in our reading is on the war on terrorism, the global war on terrorism. And the global war on terrorism was very significant because the United States, for really the first time, openly justified making an overt, conventional, large-scale war on actually initially 2 different countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, on the basis of the concept of preemptive war. That is the idea that while Iraq, let's take Iraq for example, as a country, the government of Iraq had not attacked the United States, but the United States deemed that because Saddam Hussein might pose a threat in the future, that it justified that in the modern age, the old sovereign state system that we had spoken about, that we learned about and we spoke about back in the beginning of the class, the Peace of Westphalia, that old sovereign nation state system was no longer capable to handle the issues of the modern world with technology and globalization, facilitating acts of terrorism that could occur at any moment outside of any particular country's boundaries. Um, and so, as a result of that, the United States justified the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan on the basis of preemptive war, that the United States was making war against a country to preempt a possible future threat. For critics of that policy, that was highly controversial because it ran counter to the very basis of international law. The basis of international law, as we learned about this in class, going back to the ramifications of the Protestant Reformation and the development of an independent Dutch Republic, the basis for international law in the world was the idea of the sovereign nation state, and the idea that a nation that has not attacked another nation should be free from having its borders infringed by another. And that concept has, of course, been violated before, but it is at the grounding, the acceptance of this is at the grounding of the basis of international law. And what the United States was saying with the war in Iraq was that the old concept of national sovereignty, no matter what, the old national sovereign state system did not always meet the needs of the world given the crisis of terrorism. That the modern crisis of international terrorism, made possible by new technologies, airplanes, globalization, and so forth, basically negated, in certain cases, the old sovereign nation state system. And critics saw this as a violation of that very important system designed to protect the rights, particularly of smaller nations, from attack from larger nations. Whereas advocates in the Bush administration, for example, believe it was justified on the basis of the potential threat from a government like Saddam Hussein, which of course we know had no involvement in the September 11th attacks. And so it became very controversial for that. So that is the topic for this week. Here's the factoid for this week related to this. The factoid is this. Following 9/11, Congress passed a resolution. It's called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force. And that resolution, which was passed after the September 11th attacks, is still in place today. And it has been used to justify a myriad of interventions by the United States around the world. In fact, the authorization for the use of military force has been used to justify interventions in 10 different countries around the world. I believe it's 10. It's a significant number. 10 different countries around the world have experienced some form, whether it's a drone attack or a full-scale war like Afghanistan, have experienced some kind of intervention from the United States justified on the basis of the authorization for the use of military force, which was a congressional authorization, not a war declaration, that authorized the executive branch the right to use military force in the world in fighting the threat of international terrorism. And it remains on the books now nearly 20 years on, and has been used to justify interventions in some 10 different countries around the world. And so that's a very, very significant development when it comes to the United States in the world, the interventionism of the United States in the world designed to promote the national security and the interests of the United States. And so the authorization for the use of military force is really the core document from Congress that justifies the so-called wars of wars to combat global terrorism. And of course, it's led to controversial involvements like the involvement of the United States in Yemen, which resulted in the U.S. Senate invoking the War Powers Resolution, which was passed in the aftermath of Vietnam, due to its frustration because of its lack of an ability to really control when and where the executive branch of the United States chooses to intervene. And so the factoid for this week, the authorization for the use of military force, created after 9/11, designed to provide the executive branch with power to combat the threat of global international terrorism, and still in place today. And it has been invoked in some 10 different countries, interventions in some 10 different countries. All right, so I hope everybody's really enjoyed this class. I've had some familiar faces in this class, and there's been some other students I haven't had before. I've really enjoyed this class with you, and I hope each of you have very much enjoyed this class, and I hope you've learned something in the class, and I hope to see you in other classes of mine in the future. So I look forward to giving you this last bonus point for your test. Also, there is an extra credit opportunity, and that information is in the modules for this week. It was in there last week, and so please see that if you're interested in further extra credit. Otherwise, let's have a great week. Do that paper if you haven't done a paper yet, and don't forget to take the final test. And let's have a great week.